Hey, good morning, everyone. Dr. Bogosian here. I want to welcome you to class where we have been considering a number of different views on the nature of justice and the just society. And so far, I hope you have been finding these very interesting and stimulating, even challenging, as you try to figure out what your life might look like individually, or how it might look differently as an individual if you think more carefully about what it is to lead a life of justice. But beyond that, what it might look like for you to contribute to helping us arrange society such that it is a just society for all of its participants. Today, what we're going to do is look at an additional view from the philosopher Aristotle about the nature of justice and the just society. And you're going to see numerous things today. Number one, you're going to see how different it is from John Rawls' view. Remember, John Rawls thinks that we don't need to have a conception of the good for human beings to inform what it is to build a just society or what justice is. He thinks you can pull those apart. Aristotle is going to reject that. He thinks you have to understand what the good person is and kind of the human good is in order to adequately characterize and construct a just society. And we're going to also notice here that there's a big emphasis on the character of the individual and the character of those leading our society if we are going to have a just society. So without further ado, why don't you go ahead and download the handout from the Canvas modules to help you follow along. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen and share it with you. Okay, Aristotle has this view of justice that we can kind of put in a nice phrase, and we're going to unpack this throughout our time over the next two presentations. But justice for Aristotle is giving each person what is due to them. Another phrase here would be called just deserts. The idea here is you give each person what they deserve. If they deserve good things on the basis of their actions, then we give them that. If they deserve not good things on the basis of their violent or bad actions, well, then we give them that. And so you can already start to hear that justice as giving each their due has a longstanding influence in the West in general and in the United States of America in particular in the founding documents of our Constitution, as well as many laws and public policies that inform how we live and do our daily lives as a community. Let's take this a step further and look at the two key features of justice for Aristotle. For Aristotle, justice is kind of comprised of or built up of two key features. Number one is that it's teleological in nature. Teleological comes from a kind of fancy Greek word, if you will, telos. And telos means literally purpose, aim, goal, or end. And so if we're going to understand what rights an individual has, okay, we have to know the purpose, end, or essential nature of the practice they are participating in. And for Aristotle, every object, every practice, social practice, has an end, has an essential nature, which makes up its end. Now, that's all really important language. Notice that it's not an accidental nature. It has an essence, right? So this bottle, this water bottle, has an essential nature. And that is going to be understood by asking, what is this bottle for? Well, it's for holding the liquid contents and enabling me to not only keep them hot or cold and then, drink from this bottle so that I can consume them. Well, that's its essential nature, right? Its essential nature isn't to hit a volleyball, for example. Its essential nature is to hold liquid contents and keep them at the temperature you put them in there, original temperature you put them in there with, and then to be able to consume it. A social practice like education or a sport or a business has an essential nature, and we're going to understand that essential nature by understanding what its main goal or set of goals are that it aims at, okay, to fulfill its purpose. Number two, so justice is like that. Justice has an essential nature, okay? And kind of working out justice is going to be determined by understanding the nature of each thing that comes up, right, arises or is affected by our discussion in the social sphere, right? Whether it's, you have a right to not be harmed is going to depend on the kinds of practices you're engaged with, right, at the time. So if you're engaging in battle, right, you're fighting another nation and you have a firearm, well, that's going to get a different answer than if you're sitting in your home eating pizza and watching TV, right? Your right to not be harmed should be intact there, right? It would be unjust for you to be harmed, but it won't be unjust for you to be harmed if you're shooting at an enemy combatant, for example. Number two, justice is honorific. Ancient Greece was an honor-shame culture. Honor was a very big thing. Being honored or blessed or praised, right, for what you do that is the right thing to do is very different than shaming a person who does the wrong or bad thing that they should not do. This is the other side of justice. Once we understand the end or the telos of a practice, we also have to understand what virtues, what qualities, what character qualities, and what skills a person must possess and utilize as they participate in that practice. And if they use those skills properly and well as they participate in that practice, they will be worthy of honor or reward for their use of those virtues in helping the practice reach its end. So if an athlete uses the skills particular to that sport or that athletic practice well to help their team win or to help that practice flourish and thrive, they're worthy of the rewards attached to that, right? Maybe a trophy or maybe monetary compensation, et cetera, et cetera. But they're worthy of some kind of recognition, and the symbol that the recognition takes on could be, or the form it takes could be very different. Justice is the same way. If a person does the right thing, they're worthy of honor, respect, regard, are acknowledging that they've practiced rightly, okay? They've embodied the relevant, excellent qualities for that practice. And so this is why, right, we typically think in monetary terms in our country where a doctor is paid well if they practice well, right? They embody the virtues of a good doctor. That's conducive to helping people be healthy and well. And so they're rewarded in different ways, maybe through promotions, through higher pay, through getting a more lucrative job at a better hospital. And so justice is both teleological and honorific. Now, there's a problem that Aristotelians have with two previous thinkers we've looked at, two previous views of justice. Number one, Immanuel Kant, and number two, John Rawls. Both of them kind of pull apart justice and rights from honor. They think we can conceive of justice, right and wrong, in a just society, apart from a conception of goodness and virtue and moral desert, we might say, moral reward. Aristotle says, no, you have to have those together. In order to think adequately and accurately about human rights, you have to also think about honor and virtue and moral reward. Justice is about all of this. It's about rights, it's about honor, it's about the good life that humans are designed to lead in light of what our human purpose is, which is for Aristotle to thrive in every dimension of the self. And we'll say more about that in a little bit. Those are the two features of justice. Let's drill down a little deeper to understand what it looks like to be a just person and build a just society. Justice for Aristotle is giving each person what they deserve. What we deserve could be understood in terms of distributing justice, giving equal persons equal things. All humans have equal value in Aristotle's eyes. We're equally human, no matter how small or young, no matter how big or old. And so therefore we ought to be given equal things, provided that we act in such a way where we merit those equal things in relation to the practice or practices we're participating in. So if as a parent, I'm a good parent, I should be awarded, if you will, the maintaining of the parental rights that I start out with, which is to raise my kids the way I want. If I neglect those responsibilities, then I'm no longer entitled to equal benefits as a parent towards in my relationship towards my children. Distributive justice, right, in the social sphere would include, well, if I'm not harming anyone, I'm entitled to equal treatment under the law where I'm not harmed back. But if I harm someone, then I'm no longer entitled to not be harmed under Aristotle's view here. So you should get what you deserve, and the law is going to exist to help with that, as we'll see. Equal distribution is going to be depending on what's being distributed. If you work a job, right, if I'm as a teacher and working a teaching job, teachers should, if you will, be treated the same. They should have equal position and even equal pay, compensation based on their equal function and output, right? Performing their job well. So what's distributed and the virtues relevant. So if I'm a good teacher, right, I should have those benefits that attach to that because I'm not only doing my job, but I'm doing it well. But if I fail to do it well, so a performance review could be something that helps hold a person accountable for embodying the virtues relevant to their practice. That's equal distribution. And so there might be penalties for not, for malpracticing, if you will. And we see this in healthcare and other jobs. People are fired or they're let go, right, etc. Justice includes not only distribution, but discrimination. Now, hold on to this. This is a really important and controversial thing for some. Usually when we hear discrimination today, it's like using the F word, right? It's a really it conjures up all sorts of bad things. Discrimination equals bad and evil. Not necessarily for Aristotle. It depends on what the discrimination is based on. In light of what are we discriminating? Now, let's suppose I try out for a professional basketball team in the NBA and I don't make the cut. Well, I'm being discriminated, right, upon the basis of lacking the relevant skills to compete at that level, and maybe at any level for that matter, right? But that wouldn't mean I'm being dealt with unjustly on Aristotle's view. I lack the merit and the relevant excellences, right, the relevant skills to play in the NBA. And so that would be just discrimination. But let's suppose I have the relevant skills and the relevant abilities to play at the professional level, but I don't make the cut because they don't think I'm good looking enough, or because they don't like the family I was raised in, or they don't like the color of my skin, right, or something like this. Well, that would be unjust discrimination. So for Aristotle, discrimination is sometimes wrong and bad, but it's not intrinsically bad. It's only bad when it is based upon things that are not directly tied to the flourishing of the practice in question. If a person is unable to teach, they lack the knowledge or they lack just the ability to, let's say, transmit knowledge, then they shouldn't be a teacher, right? If someone isn't strong enough and able to fire a weapon, they shouldn't be in the military, let's say. And so just discrimination weeds out the people that aren't fit to promote the relevant excellences of a practice. But what we should not do is discriminate on the basis of things not tied to the flourishing of the practice. Now, another way to think about this is, well, how do we think about who gets what? Who is deserving of what? Well, one answer is, if we take a specific practice like flute playing, or we could even talk about music more broadly, who should get the best quality instrument, okay, that are made by the best manufacturers? Well, one answer could be we give it to the people who just make good music, the best music. Well, what if someone could make the best music by using their computer and they don't actually need a flute, but they have an electronic flute sound? Okay, well, that's a very utilitarian way of thinking about who gets what. We give the best instruments to whoever makes the best result, right? So the good flutes are a mere means to the end of maximizing good music, right? The production of good music, I should say. For Aristotle, it's going to be understood this way. Good flutes exist for the purpose of being played well, making beautiful, flute music. The best players are more likely to produce that. Therefore, right, since they're more likely to realize the end for which flutes exist, making good flute music, then they have an entitlement, right? We should discriminate in their favor, right? They deserve to have the best flutes over someone like me who can't play the flute, right? Just because I'm wealthy, and let's say I'm not, but let's suppose I was wealthy and I could afford a $20,000 rare flute. Well, the fact that I have the money isn't sufficient for me being able to buy it. I need to be also able to play it. So a person is deserving of something to the degree that they can help promote the end of the practice in question. All right. This is why we give jobs to people who have the relevant knowledge and skills, as opposed to people who do not, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you can see here at the heart of figuring out who gets what is asking the question, what is something for? Okay. What is X for? What is education for? What is this bottle for? What is your phone for? What is a family relationship or a romantic relationship for? Okay. Should a collector or a skilled player have priority in purchasing a vintage guitar worth $10,000 or $20,000? Well, that depends on the meaningful order of guitar playing. All nature and all practices have an essential, discernible, meaningful order to them versus there being chaotic. A sport has an order to it. A discipline or a practice has an order and a discernible nature. Once we discern the nature of the practice or the thing, we can understand our place in nature or in relation to that practice will require grasping the end or essential meaning, right? Okay, so let's use some examples. Should I be able to play on a professional NBA team simply because I want to? It's a dream of mine. No. Why? Well, because the essential nature of professional sports is for those sports to be played at the highest level and that's going to now require the most skilled people. I lack the quality of being a most skilled person, so I shouldn't have a place at the table, so to speak, in playing professional basketball. But should I have a place at the table of teaching philosophy? Well, yes, if I have the relevant knowledge base and training, as well as the skills involved. Okay. Now, you might say, well, I don't know if I like this kind of teleological thinking of whether I have a right to participate in something based on whether I have the skill or not. Let's suppose we reject teleological thinking in science. Does it follow that we can do the same in terms of morality and how we treat one another, or even in politics, in terms of political leadership, or in our political? Now, when you hear politics here, don't think of political parties like we tend to do. Politics here is a big, broad notion for Aristotle, including our social political interactions. That's everything from driving on the road to working a job to voting to how you treat your neighbor, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's suppose we reject teleological thinking in science, right? There's no end for biological organisms. There's no purpose to them. Some people, like Richard Dawkins, believes that. But let's suppose, and maybe you reject that, but let's suppose you're Richard Dawkins and you reject that about biological organisms. Can we also reject that notion of teleology with respect to morality and politics? In other words, can we say that there's no end or purpose to human beings and how we treat one another, or how we should arrange society simply because biological organisms have no ultimate end or goal or purpose? Aristotle and Aristotelians are going to say no, and here's why. Let's take a case study of colleges and universities. I want you to pause the video after I say this and before you continue. But here's the thought experiment, the case study. What do you think the university exists for? What is its purpose, or what are its purposes? What do you think are its essential purposes? Take a minute to pause the video, write down 1, 2, or 3 things, and then we'll come back together and I'm going to give you a few things that I want you to think about. Okay, one answer to this question that's often given is that the college or the university exists to promote scholarly excellence as well as academic promise in its students. So you can see one is aimed at the teachers and faculty, the other is aimed at the quality of student. So we don't just exist on the Aristotelian picture to get people degrees so that they can get better paying jobs. That would be a utilitarian approach to education and to how we think about the university or the college. Aristotle has a problem with that because he thinks there's nothing wrong with getting a good job or having a degree, but that's we're not degree mills, right? The university shouldn't be just pumping out people with pieces of paper, as we say. Instead, it has a social civic function of producing certain kinds of individuals. And so what if we're going to produce on the other end a certain kind of individual, we have to accept into the system a certain kind of individual. And that's someone who has academic promise, who can engage with people who have scholarly excellence and credentials and minds, who can now build into them, pour into the student certain things so that they can produce in the students a certain kind of person who's now going to go out into the social political arena and have impact. So number two, the goal of a university, what it exists for, is to produce people who are good civic individuals, right? Who are commit to the civic purposes of leadership, innovation, promoting the good of the business or practice or industry that they're a part of. Well, if you're going to produce people like that, they have to show some promise when they come into your school, some ability, right? They have to have some markers, some merits. And so the university exists to take people with merit and to cultivate it, right? To pour more into that and develop it. So when they come out, they can head out into society and be good people who promote good leadership, innovation in their area, and now can also pass along their skills and knowledge to others. So transmission of knowledge, right? A university exists for knowledge on the Aristotelian picture, but it's not just to give information out, it's to help develop knowledgeable persons. And that's going to require not only knowledge in their discipline, but moral knowledge. Now, I want you to think about all that. We typically want to say, oh, it's not the school's job to produce, to talk about morality. Well, look, every school does, whether they want to admit it or not. We tell students not to cheat. We tell students to have integrity. We tell students to not bully. All of that is laden with moral categories, right? Right and wrong, good and bad. And so the university exists to form people, both students and staff, into good people who are good citizens, contributing to the good of society. But that's, notice, is a very formative approach to education. Yes, we're passing on knowledge, but we want people to be knowers so that we can trust them. You don't go to a mechanic who you don't trust. You trust your mechanic, hopefully, to have the relevant knowledge as well as a good ethic to not exploit you or take advantage of you. You go to a doctor you trust not only has a degree hanging on the wall, but that they really know how to do surgery or how to help you and prescribe the right medicine. At the first blink, right, at the first indication that they're not trustworthy, you're going to run for the door and find someone else in any field. So knowledge has power to kind of bring with it trust. And so the university exists to build people who are trustworthy. Now, you might say, okay, but there's a problem here. We don't all agree. Universities and colleges don't all agree about the purpose of the university or what specific qualities they're trying to form into their students. Some people see their institution as trying to build, I don't know, social justice kind of types, who are concerned about social justice. Other people say, that's fine if you want to do that on your own time, but we're not about that. We're about building people who are leaders and so on. Okay, so what do we do with disagreement here? And there is disagreement, as you know. Well, the answer for Aristotle is we resolve disagreements about the purpose, okay, the purpose of practices and virtues they should reward. How? By thinking about distributive justice. What is it that we should be giving to people, whether it's staff and faculty or students? What honors and offices, positions should they rightfully hold by participating in the practice of higher education? Well, that might not necessarily be money or opportunity. It might be those things, but maybe it's trust, public trust, right? And so we distribute things based on whether someone is bringing with their engaging in the practice trustworthiness. A student who is violating trust might be dismissed from the school. A faculty member who is violating the public trust might be dismissed from their tenured position, right? And so for Aristotle, we resolve these disagreements by saying, well, maybe there's some flexibility about what set of virtues can be praised and honored. But we can't reduce it just to money and opportunity. We have to look at whether they're actually helping education flourish or whether they're impeding the flourishing of education. And that's a distributive justice way of thinking about the good of education and what we're aiming for and what we're rewarding. But we also have to bring into it again discrimination. Remember, there are just discriminations within the education system, according to Aristotle. Why? Well, because you can't just take everyone in as a student. Not everyone has the abilities or the promise, shows the promise as a student to become a leader and an innovator and to acquire the knowledge and so on. And that's not bad, right? If the goal of a university, if its purpose is to develop people of a certain type, well, then they're just to discriminate who they let in on the basis of whether those people embody certain virtues in their application, right? And so it would be wrong to discriminate now if a person has those virtues, but just doesn't come from the right family or isn't the right age or isn't have the right look or doesn't dress a certain way, okay? Those would be unjust discriminations in enrolling students, but it would be just to discriminate on the basis of them lacking certain qualities that's needed to be a student and perform at the level required of the practice to become the kind of person that the school is trying to develop. Now, what rights and authority are due to students and to staff, faculty? Well, that's going to depend on what's called political association. Political association here is not party affiliation, right? Political association is where you have associations in the social political domain with certain individuals and groups. But to know who has the right authority is going to depend on what the association is for. So what is political association and community for? Well, Hayek and Rawls think it's for helping people choose for themselves what ends and goals for their lives they want. For Aristotle, political community exists for the purpose of helping citizens form themselves as well as especially good character. So political authority is not just about protecting property and promoting prosperity. That's fine as far as it goes for Aristotle. It also needs to focus on development of character, because otherwise, if we only focus on prosperity and property, that's going to privilege the wealthy at the expense of the not so wealthy. And so political associations need to be helping everyone develop into good people who thrive in every dimension of their self. Political authority also is not about the majority getting their way. Aristotle, like his teacher Plato in Plato's Republic, are very skeptical about democratic forms of government. Now, whether you agree with this or not, this is at least interesting and worth thinking about. They are worried that if we just let the masses decide what is good and right and just, then we won't typically build a just society. Why? Well, because they have this thing called the tyranny of the majority. The majority sometimes gets hooped up in a tizzy, right? We get all whooped up and we get engaged in, I don't know, identity politics or just get on the bandwagon, and we're not using reason to think about what's actually right and good for society. And that's where the majority takes over and it just becomes tyrannical as opposed to virtuous. And so political authority shouldn't just be given to the masses. We need, people should be able to vote, but there also needs to be a distribution of political authority based on character and based on the purpose of politics, which is helping people develop their distinct capacities and virtues. So if the masses aren't aimed at that, well, then they shouldn't have the final say. If they just want to have the power for their group, well, then that's not promoting the flourishing of everybody. If they want just the power for their leader, who's going to give the power to their group or give the group what they want, that's not good. So there has to be a balance of powers, and that's going to be determined by whether people have good character promoting everyone's development, the development of everyone's capacities. And this is what we call the common good. Helping people learn to use their minds to deliberate and reason practically for what's going to advance the thriving and flourishing of the whole community. When we come back for the next lecture, we're going to pick this up and talk further about political association and political authority and how we now develop and set the conditions to help people develop good character and ultimately thrive and be happy.